Celiac disease is a disease where the body mistakenly produces antibodies that damage its own tissues. The cure is quite simple. Just eliminate wheat, rye, barley and oats from your diet, which leaves pretty much nothing, not even beer. And people won't want to invite you to dinner.
I know, you can get the Coeliac beer.
You can.
You can,
right.
yeah. All right, well, today marks the start of Coeliac Awareness Week and we're joined by athlete and celiac sufferer Glenn Singleton, along with dietitian Karen Inge. Good morning to you both.
Well, good morning.
How common is this celiac disease?
It is more common than you think. 1 in 100 Australians are thought to have celiac disease, but the very disturbing thing is that 75% are undiagnosed, so they're unaware that they actually have the condition.
It's a really tricky thing to diagnose. And how long did it take for your diagnosis to...
5 or 6 years for doctors to actually think about doing the test, and then straight away within 6 months I knew from the gastroenterologist what it was.
What were your symptoms?
Lethargy, tiredness, upset stomach, fatigue, low body weight.
Non-specific in that way, really. It could be anything, and that's part of the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, doctors just don't know what to look for.
It can be easily mistaken for irritable bowel, or just that you know, the lethargy. You can have one symptom, you can just be tired. It can be picked up because you have an iron deficiency. The problem is you can have early stages of osteoporosis, but generally it's sort of excessive wind, diarrhea, constipation. So it is easy to be misdiagnosed.
And it's quite debilitating for those people that suffer from it. What happens? What's going on inside the gut?
Well, what happens is that when it's really an intolerance to the protein fraction of some grains that you mentioned, and that's called gluten. And what happens is that the gluten itself starts attacking the lining of the intestine, the small intestine, where a lot of the absorption takes place. And I'm putting my fingers up like this because you've got the villi, and
you've got your shopping list on your hand too.
It's a very important number I'm about to tell you about, but it's interesting because the villi are actually like shag pile carpet, and they're there to help absorb the nutrients. And when gluten attacks it becomes flattened if you have gluten intolerance, and therefore you can't absorb the nutrients. So that's why it's sort of like a malabsorption effect.
Is it often coupled with other things? You mentioned malabsorption, and I know that at times it can be coupled with a malabsorption of vitamin C, can't it? Well, fructose in some cases.
Well, yes. I mean, you can. You certainly can get iron problems, and you can malabsorb calcium and vitamin D, etc. But I think the most important thing is that people do not self-diagnose, because as a dietitian, I mean, if you think you have some of these symptoms, the worst thing to do is cut out wheat. You must go and have a proper medical diagnosis.
Sure. Yeah. GP.
But how easy is that? Because, as you said, it took a long time.
Yeah.
My wife has the same disease. It took a long time to get diagnosed.
Well, being celiac week, go to your doctor and ask for a test.
So you need to ask for a specific celiac disease test.
Just a blood test.
Yeah, if you feel your mojo is missing, so to speak, your joie de vivre, your the whole aspect of your energy levels, then just go to your doctor. Certainly make an appointment to see your doctor. You've really got to organise and ask for celiac testing to be done. It's a simple blood test.
But just make sure, as Karina found out, make sure that you continue to eat foods with gluten in them when you have the test, because if you cut it out, obviously you're not going to have the symptoms.
That's right.
Let's go on and talk about diet, because I know that you've advised Glenn on what he can and can't eat. So,
how difficult is it?
Yeah, where do you start?
Well, I think Karen had the difficulty first. I was her first celiac I think she'd ever seen as an athlete.
Oh, that's right. Wow.
She was a bit panicky when I walked in the door.
Well, you've still got to keep up massive amounts of protein and
huge amounts of energy. So,
oh, look at those arms. Goodness.
You've got to just make sure you eat heaps of fruit, veggies, other grains, nuts.
Rice becomes an important feature because when the most important thing with an athlete, of course, or anybody who needs extra energy, when you're cutting out wheat, you're cutting out pasta, you're cutting out bread, you're cutting out a lot of those sorts of high energy foods. But rice and corn are good sources of carbohydrate, which are a grain. And you've got all the wonderful grains like quinoa, for example, and buckwheat that are all suitable for people with celiac disease. You can eat a very wide array of fruits and vegetables. The hardest thing is to actually find out the ingredients. So you need to be a good label reader, because a lot of the components in foods that are sort of additives are actually wheat derived. So some of the thickeners and stabilisers and things like that in processed foods can contain gluten, and it was very hard. I think there's a greater awareness. I was amazed. I wouldn't think that an athlete in the early days, when I first saw Glenn, would have a condition like this and still be able to perform at the level that he was performing at.
Yeah, what sort of improvement did you notice when you cut out all of the gluten?
Over about 10 years, I've put on 14 kilos.
Oh, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, hopefully if it's a muscle. So I put on a fair bit of size, and I improved 10 or more seconds over 1,000 metres.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
That's a lot, isn't it?
10 seconds over 1,000 metres?
Yeah, so over 3.5, 4 minutes.
Did you notice you were able to step up with the training?
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
So how was the difference before being diagnosed and after, in terms of training? Lethargy
was quite large, so I'd go probably 1 or 2 sessions a day, a lot more sleeping, and then probably 3 to 4 at the end.
Wow. So it actually improved you as an athlete?
Yeah, for sure.
All over.
Yeah, the stress I can imagine for you is, well, you would think that when you're doing that much exercise you would expect to be fatigued.
Yeah, you would. So you just think it's what normally happens, because you don't know how everyone else is feeling.
Yeah.
People say they're tired, but are they really?
Yeah. How long did it take for you to start feeling better?
Within weeks. And within 6 months, my gut had returned to normal, because I had 2 biopsies taken.
Right.
Wow.
Right. So, what are the risk factors? Is it genetic?
Yes, it is genetic. The condition is genetic. So if you have somebody with celiac disease in your family, then it's very important that you go to your doctor and you find out if you have the genes, or alternatively have some testing for celiac disease. It's a simple blood test initially, but certainly it is important to find out, because long term, if you go undiagnosed, besides not feeling great, there are problems with liver disease, cancer. So you really do, osteoporosis, and even we were talking about before, Glenn, that fertility issues, particularly for males. So sometimes you go off to IVF programs, etc., and it's really that your husband has a problem with fertility because he's an undiagnosed person with undiagnosed celiac disease. So
that is extraordinary.
The damage that is caused in the gut, does that repair itself?
Oh, very quickly. Very quickly. As in Glenn's case, it was 6 months, but it depends on the severity of the damage. So the longer you go undiagnosed, the more damage you're doing, because you're still eating gluten-containing foods. But people can feel better in 5 days.
Yeah.
It's probably not a question for you, but I'm wondering whether that makes him more susceptible to diverticulitis later on, because he's had that trauma in the gut.
Probably not so much diverticulitis, I don't think, which are pockets in the bowel, but... We don't know how long you had the condition.
What?
Sorry.
What now? What next?
No, well, we don't know how long. You don't know how long you had the condition.
No, because I don't know. I had the gene, but I don't know when it was switched on. Switched on to actually have the disease.
It can be switched on
through stress, and it might have been through my athletic pursuits that switched it on. So
How do you find it now when you go out to dinner?
Quite stressful, but in Australia it's a lot more. It's easier than eating in Bulgaria or Hungary or something like that. What I've eaten over the last 6, 7, 9 years since I've been diagnosed. So that was my biggest stress in my life, was actually knowing how I could get the diet I needed in a foreign country. I usually take about 20 kilos of food with me, but I'm away for 4 months. That's not much food for 4 months, so that's sort of my safety packet. But I buy steak and chips a lot. But a lot of restaurants have it on their menu now, you probably know.
Well, I'm thinking too, as an Aussie bloke, it's probably a bit hard to go out to a restaurant with your mates. You go, oh, and can I just have the gluten-free version? You know, when they're eating the big steak and, you know, and
that's why I asked for the steak, the biggest steak. And
steak's all right.
And chips,
and potatoes.
Cool.
Perfect.
Has to pass the bread. But I think the important thing is there are numbers that you can call. The Coeliac Society is fantastic. They have a phone number that everybody should ring that is, I can't remember, but it's 1300 458 836, and there's heaps of information there, and people, it really is important that people get the correct diagnosis, and then they know they've got a lot of support from the Coeliac Society and dietitians out there.
You don't go through the stress of changing your life if you don't actually have to.
Yes,
exactly. You look as great as he does. It's wonderful.
Absolutely, I'd like those arms. All right, thank you so much. Good to talk to you both of you.
Thanks, Glenn.
Right, Marianne's waiting for us now, and there's plenty more of 9am still to come after this.